Nowhere else on Earth is there a tropical beachside resort with a huge 20th century historic district of hotels, cafes, and restaurants, flanked by museums, art galleries, and nightclubs. Miami Beach's transformation from an unpopulated barrier island into one of the most famous cities in the world is a story best told by the generations of people who came and stayed. The stories go back more than a century.
1893, John S. Collins came down here to check on his farm on this island, this jungle-covered island off the shores of Biscayne Bay. Mr. Collins, who himself was a tree farmer, a Quaker tree farmer in New Jersey, so he had some expertise in growing, as did his partners, but they had never encountered anything like farmland that they tried to make out of Miami Beach.
Collins linked up with Carl Fisher to connect the island to the mainland and open Miami Beach to development. The landscape changed, and so did the variety of people who came to put down roots in a small town which was growing fast.
5th Street was the main area. It was the hub. I remember some years later, after I moved here, I told my friends that I was looking at an apartment on 41st Street, and they said, all the way up there? But 5th Street was the hub. There was a drugstore on the corner owned by the Galvets.
It was the hub at that time. All these fabulous restaurants that went up and down the street that really had a Jewish slant to it, the quote unquote, the Jewish deli. And it's really interesting that that really came to the beach and was such a prominent position, because Miami Beach, when it was originally founded, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in the community, where no blacks or Jews or dogs were allowed into hotels and so on. And it's amazing how that changed so much.
For blacks in a southern city, change was a long time coming. The only black people allowed on the beach were there to work as servants, golf caddies, and domestics. Those memories are still painful.
I was a good student at Booker T. Washington High School. I could type, I wrote well, I could spell, but I couldn't get a job in clerical work because I was black. And so the only thing that was open to black women, if you didn't have a degree in nursing or a teacher's degree or social work, you became a maid.
The area below 5th Street attracted immigrants and the sons and daughters of immigrants, mostly from Eastern Europe.
My grandparents had a sign shop on 1st Street. My aunt had the hotel on 1st Street. A lot of my friends lived on 1st Street. And my father's name is part of the sign on the Jewish Museum on 3rd Street. The Jewish population, I would say, in my recollection, was below 5th Street.
Despite the devastating impact of the 1926 hurricane and the 1929 stock market crash, entrepreneurs built scores of small hotels and apartment buildings to bring tourists back. The style was a streamlined, modern look in vogue in New York and Europe, a style which would come to be called Art Deco. Most were built by two prolific architects, Henry Hohauser and L. Murray Dixon.
There were just so many wonderful hotels, most of them not gigantic, more of them probably 50, 70 rooms, 80 rooms. There were some that were bigger, but most of them, and of course all in the Art Deco type style. Until I got older, I never even appreciated his work. I mean, to me, a hotel was a hotel and a whatever, and I really never, I mean, I used to walk over to Ocean Drive and go to the beach there and never even thought about it in terms of, wow, what a beautiful hotel or whatever.
After the Depression, they were trying to get people to come down, so they built hotels with lots of light and lots of color, glass and terrazzo floors to make everything bright and clean. And the hotel rooms were intended to be a little smaller so they could come down and pay for them instead of the big ritzy hotels. And they would have some of those, but they wanted the general public to come.
During World War II, Miami Beach became a barracks town. For kids on the beach, the war was close by as German submarines targeted coastal shipping.
The war really came home when on several times we watched tankers burning off the coastline, and boys being boys, we would all go down to the beach and the Navy would chase us all away. But I remember seeing floating life jackets full of tar and debris from ships full of tar, but they would always chase us away.
Soldiers trained on the beach, marched in the streets, and lived in beach hotels. After the war, many veterans returned to make a fresh start and raise families. The beach experienced a population explosion. By then, the proximity of the Caribbean and Latin America had given Miami Beach a distinctly Latin flavor.
I just fell in love with Latin music. I heard it really for the first time. And then that's what turned me to everything Latin. I mean, my desire then, at that early age, was not to learn about Latin stuff, to be Cuban. So I loved the music, I loved the food, I loved the girls. I think it was a combination of Miami Beach and puberty, kicking in at the same time.
After Fidel Castro came to power in 1959, Cuban exiles poured into Miami. Many checked into hotels on Miami Beach, expecting to return to Cuba as soon as Castro was overthrown.
We figured out we were going to be in Miami for a year. It was going to be like an extended vacation, and everything was going to go back to normal. You know, we were going to go back to Cuba and continue our lives. Well, you know, fast forward 52 years later, you know, I'm a grandfather, and I consider myself a native of Miami Beach. You know, I got sand on my shoes.
A big draw for vacationers and residents alike was gambling. Beach hotels were frequented by both the famous and the infamous. It didn't matter which group you belonged to, nobody asked questions.
My father used to set up card tables around the pool, and these guys from Chicago and New York used to come down and they sit at the table, and my father would say to me, bring them orange juice, bring them towels, and don't hang around. Just get lost.
All the hotels in the cabanas, they always had the big card games where people would pay gin and rummy, you know, for $1 a point, and they could bet on the horses. There was a Blackstone Hotel down here. They used to have in the cellar, they had a huge, huge room where you could make your bets on horses all over the country. They had big blackboards down there, and the people used to erase it to put the odds up, and then you could make all your bets at the Blackstone.
Jews from the Northeast retired to Miami Beach in the 1970s, taking up residence in the small Deco hotels. In 1980 came the Mariel exodus from Cuba. The area was awash with crime and fear. Many had written off South Beach as a disaster. One who did not was Barbara Baer Capitman, a writer, design expert, and, as it turns out, a superb community organizer who promoted Art Deco as a legitimate architectural style and Miami Beach as the world's largest historic district.
My mother had a good idea. She had nothing to lose. She had the best possible imaginable skill set for taking on what was largely a hearts and minds battle. And she just stuck to it.
Another visionary was Tony Goldman, the man who turned a rough neighborhood in New York City into hip SoHo. He came to check out Miami Beach.
He tells me that he just made a turn onto Ocean Drive, and he has seen the American Riviera, and he said, get on a plane and get down here right away. And the next day I was here in Miami, and it was a very, very exciting time for Goldman Properties.
When we put our for rent sign out after we renovated the first building, we really didn't know if anybody would want to move here. They thought it was, people said it's preposterous. You're from the Northeast, you New Yorkers, you're all the same.
You know, you think you can come into Miami Beach and, you know, make these things happen. It'll never happen. We have to tear down all of South Beach and start again. Well, thank God we didn't do that.
About the time South Beach started getting a facelift, the Miami Vice television series was looking for a place to base the show. South Beach had crime, color, and looked good for nighttime filming with its cool neon and dark shadows. Soon, Miami Beach became the world capital of edgy sophistication, and tourism boomed again.
Where else but Miami Beach?
Here, think about the experience you can have. You can get up and have breakfast in a Cuban cafe. You can then go to the beach. You can then have lunch in a great local restaurant. You can then shop in the greatest stores in the world if you want, or you can walk on Lincoln Road, or you can do all these great things. And then in the evening, you can go see the opera, or you can go see the art films, or you can go do these incredible, or you can watch a Philharmonic performance outdoors. You can't do that anywhere else. And that's because all of this architecture has been preserved. That's because we have, luckily, and also because of some very smart people, we have really kept what makes this area so unique and so special.
Many who were born and raised on the beach look back in amazement at its metamorphosis into the American Riviera.
When we grew up here, it was a different world. We grew up in paradise. The only problem was we didn't know it at the time. Because if you grew up in Miami Beach in those days, you didn't know anything else.